Hi, everybody. Today is Thursday, January 2nd, 2025, and our friend Alex Krainer is back with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you for having me, Nima. Good to be with you again, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Yeah. Let's talk about what's going on right now in the United States, the New Orleans attack, and they're trying to connect it with ISIS or Daesh, as we know. And it wasn't just the attack. We had a bombing, a cyber truck bombing in front of the Trump building. How do you find the situation? Is that related to Donald Trump's presidency?
Well, my suspicion is that it is. If you remember, before Joe Biden came into the White House, we had many of these quote unquote Islamic terror attacks all over the place in Europe. We had multiple cases of trucks running into crowds and killing a bunch of people in France, I think in Germany as well. We had beheading of Christians in churches. This was quite rampant, and then since Joe Biden has been in the White House, this all magically disappeared. And now that Joe Biden's term is ending, and we should have Donald Trump take over, ISIS is magically back, and we have terror in Europe and in the United States again. I can't help thinking that there's an agenda to it. I think that the powers that be have a fear that Donald Trump will withdraw troops from Syria, as he planned to do during his first term, and so now they are ramping up terror. We've seen that they're sending more troops into Syria. I think the last news I read is that they are trying to deploy an additional 3,000 U.S. troops in Syria. I don't know if this is a confirmed news or merely a rumor, but for sure they do not want to let go of their hegemony over the Middle East and all the resources that are there. And so I think that they are preparing the terrain to make it as difficult as possible for Trump to do that. And so now again we have ISIS, HTS, al-Nusra, whatever we want to call them, rampaging in Syria, which should create a justification for sending U.S. troops to. And then we have terror attacks again in the United States and in Europe to, I think, to engineer consent with the public to keep these troops in the Middle East. And there's about, I think, 64 military bases that the United States has in the Middle East. And so the empire has no, they never go in the reverse. They want to expand on this and practically spend every last penny of U.S. taxpayer money to defend their hegemony over this region. So we'll see what's going to happen, but I think that more terror attacks should be expected, and I think that they're going to be always by default blamed on ISIS, HTS, Al Qaeda, or whoever.
When you look at Syria right now and seeing that Turkey and the United States are fighting each other in Syria, these people, ISIS, Al Qaeda, whatever we can call them, they're killing civilians, and they don't know what, I don't know. He said, Al Jolani said, in 4 years, they're not going to have any sort of election in Syria. And Israel is advancing in southern part of Syria. How we talked about what has happened in Syria before, but with this new picture, and when you see these forces all playing in Syria, what's your take on that?
I think that what we learned over the last month, because it's been just about a month So the HTS incursion into Syria happened on the 27th of November. So now we are 2nd January 2025, which has been just about a month. I think that events that have transpired kind of confirm my suspicion, my initial suspicion, that this was a deliberate trap created for the empire to, to draw it into a quagmire in Syria, because there are several elements here at play. The Turks have a problem with the Kurds, and they want to take care of that once and for all, or on some kind of a more sustainable basis. They want to remove that threat. Then we have the United States, which periodically and regularly uses these Kurds as a proxy, so they are at least nominally allied with these Kurds. But as we know, the United States has no problem pushing anybody under the bus as their expediency dictates. And then we have the Israelis, who are trying to take advantage of this situation and carve out a chunk of Syria as their own security zone and the future Israeli territory, which is going to inevitably bring them into conflict with the people in Syria, but possibly even with some of their presently allied jihadi groups. Let's remember, these are all paid mercenaries by, majority of them are paid mercenaries who are not Syrians to begin with. And the thing with mercenaries is, if you pay them, they'll fight for you. So turning them against Israel could be foreseeable in the future. Then we also learned that certain elements of the Syrian Arab army regrouped, and they have withdrawn towards Iraq, and some of them are in the mountains around Latakia, and they are now. I thought that maybe they would adopt, instead of engaging in these frontal wars against their many enemies now, that they would adopt maybe Hamas and Hezbollah and Yemeni strategy of engaging in insurgency and hiding underground and in terrains where they would be difficult to pursue. And it seems to me that so far this is what could be happening. And then we don't know what's going to be happening with the Iranian proxy militias in Iraq and with the Iranians themselves, who have been sending reinforcements towards northeast of Syria. The Western powers, as I said, I read some unconfirmed news that the United States is sending additional 3,000 troops to Syria. So it looks like it's going to be an escalating chaos. The outcome, I simply don't see how the outcome could end up in favor of the Western Empire. It could turn out one of these things like Iraq and Afghanistan, which at the outset looked like clean triumphs for the Western powers, for the US and UK and NATO. But over the years, it deteriorated until they had to practically, they had to withdraw from Afghanistan after 20 years. And in Iraq, they're basically holed up in their bases where they are sitting ducks at the mercy of Iranian proxy forces or the Iranian forces themselves. So it's not going to be an easy going for the West, or for Israel, or for Turkey. But ultimately, we will know over the years. It might be years of bloodshed that will unfold there, a little bit like Libya, with the exception that I think that Syria is territorially contiguous with Iran and Iraq, and I think that the political vacuum will gradually be filled, as it did in Iraq, with the Iranian proxy forces, and perhaps in part by the Turks, who might end up carving away a chunk of Syria for themselves. But that all remains to be seen. I think that the large, at the 30,000-foot view, the large strategy in this conflict is the Western security architecture, or which should be called insecurity architecture, versus the emerging Russian, Chinese, Iranian SCO security architecture, which wants to pacify the region. The Western approach is to maintain chaos, because that's what they do. That's what they've done for the last 200 years, pitting nations against nations and using sectarian violence in order to foment chaos, in order to be able to more easily dominate the region and use it as a source of natural resources from there. So I think ultimately the game will play out in favor of Russian, Iranian, Chinese security architecture.
As we talk, the United States and British forces are bombing Sana'a in Yemen. And we know that Yemenis were capable of hitting two important targets in Israel, by, if I'm not mistaken, by Palestine 2 and Zolfaqar, two ballistic missiles coming from Iran. And they have hit the US aircraft carrier in the Red Sea. How do you see, are they capable of defeating Yemenis, or is that even imaginable or a viable choice for the United States right now?
The Yemenis have had a very, very long time to prepare for this conflict, and let's remember, the United States used Saudi Arabia as a proxy to try to pacify Yemen and to defeat the Ansar Allah in Yemen, the Houthis, and they failed. And I think that now the balance of power is even more in favor of Yemen than it was before. I think that Yemenis Ansar Allah have clearly hidden their military assets and their infrastructure. They probably hid most of it underground, where it's not even at risk, at any serious risk of being destroyed by all this bombing. And I think that the empire is when I say the empire, I mean the US and UK and NATO forces are showing their impotence by simply randomly bombing increasingly civilian targets in Yemen, always with this strategy of, okay, let's turn up the pain on the civilian population, hoping that the civilian population would turn against Ansar Allah. But this doesn't work, because it hasn't worked in Gaza Strip under much, much harsher conditions. The people there still support Hamas, and it hasn't worked in Lebanon. Why should it work in Yemen? And so I think that ultimately this whatever the Western Empire is trying to achieve there is getting away from them. It's moving away from them, and we know that already. The several months ago, Ansar Allah hit a target in Tel Aviv with a hypersonic missile. That was a message. That was simply a demonstration. The missile landed in Tel Aviv without a warhead. It simply was a message, but the message was very clear. And what it implies is that the Western powers in the Middle East have now been strategically defeated. It's very difficult to imagine how they might overturn that defeat. Certainly not by creating chaos in Syria, because by creating chaos, they might have been able to take down the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but they cannot impose their own order and control the territory. So it's only a matter of time before they're pushed out of there permanently.
Alex, when you see what has happened in the United States and what's going on in the Middle East, in the West Asia, if they go with the same plan in as we saw in 9/11 in the United States, and they came to the Middle East and they destroyed these countries, do you think right now is the same situation? Is Donald Trump willing, or is he going to have a new war in the Middle East? Because that would be a dream for Netanyahu. That would be the best thing possible in 2025. Is
Uh,
that possible? We know what Elon Musk is talking about and how he feels about these endless wars.
I think that there isn't very much that Donald Trump can do. I don't think so, because this is a question of military force. It's a question of resources that you have, to bring to bear on this problem. And I think that the United States simply doesn't have sufficient military power anymore to change the situation in the Middle East. Now, his Zionism, his devotion to the security and well-being of the state of Israel, cannot change that. And I question to what extent his Zionism is sincere or whether it's opportunistic. There's risk that the people in power, the ruling oligarchy, might like to try and eliminate Donald Trump and prevent him in some way from assuming power. And I think that in order for Trump to lessen that risk, he probably has to signal that his presidency will entail certain continuity of policy, in a way that the ruling oligarchy doesn't feel that their interests are going to be jeopardized. And I think that part of that signaling are the people with whom he has surrounded himself. So, Sebastian Gorka and Hegseth and all of these people are certified Zionists. I think that's part of the messaging. We'll see what happens when he takes power, because in his first term, he wanted to withdraw the United States forces from Syria, which the ruling establishment, they went hysterical about this. We also remember that in 2019, the British embassy lobbied very, very hard to try to get Trump to open a front against Iran, to launch an attack against Iran over their downing of the U.S. Military drone in the Persian Gulf. Trump resisted this pressure, and the British embassy and the British Foreign Office went a little bit ballistic about that. They were very, very unhappy, and it resulted in the ultimate. The United Kingdom had to withdraw their ambassador, Sir Kim Darroch, from Washington, because they've created such a diplomatic incident that he could no longer carry on as ambassador to Washington under Trump administration. And we also know that the way the United States maintained their hegemony over the Middle East is in two major ways. One is through power projection, and the other one is through their alliances with, Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan and Turkey. And we know that all these alliances are now much, much weaker. And we also know that their power projection has become completely ineffective, because it relied principally, well, almost exclusively, on carrier strike groups. So, if somebody was being, let's call it uppity in the region, they would bring on these carrier strike groups with their aircraft and missiles and rain down bombs and destruction on the let's say, disobedient regimes. Well, now, if the Houthis can launch precision uh, ballistic cruise hypersonic missiles, then they can sink these air carrier strike groups. So the Americans have had to keep them well out of reach of these missiles. And we also know that the Iranians have the same missiles, probably more powerful missiles, and certainly in much larger numbers. So if the United States ventured to escalate the war and try to fight the Iranians, they would almost certainly be defeated. The Western establishment is talking about regime changing Iran. They're not. I think they're not even dreaming about defeating Iran as it is. They would like to regime change it. That's what they want to achieve. But if you open a war against a country, the population almost invariably closes ranks behind the regime, and so you end up, solidifying the regime rather than changing. So that even that goal of regime change in Iran is getting farther away from them. I think the situation is quite desperate. I think that when it unravels completely, Israel will no longer be able to continue as a Jewish theocracy there. It will have to become a truly democratic state of where Jews, Christians, and Muslims will have real equality. And then that's pretty much the end of Israel as it's constituted today.
We know that in Lebanon, Hezbollah is talking about, it seems to me, yesterday we've learned that they're saying after 60 days, which is the duration of this ceasefire, temporary ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, they're going to get back on the battlefield and fighting Israelis. It seems that they're giving some sort of deadline to the government in Lebanon because they were behind this plan of having some sort of ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel. And I don't see any sort of chance of having any management between the two governments that could bring some sort of sanity to the behavior of Israel in Lebanon. If Hezbollah starts attacking or fighting or defending Lebanon again, is that going to change? Because we know Israel, they don't have a lot of forces. The population is, they have a small population. And right now they're overextending their forces to the southern part of Syria. If something happens with Lebanon, how do you see the situation and the way that Netanyahu is trying to manage the situation?
I think it would be very difficult to make prediction with regards to Lebanon because, as you said, the powerful, incredible military force there, even after all the blows that they have sustained to their leadership, is still Hezbollah. Lebanese national military is not a powerful military force. I think that Israel doesn't stand a chance against Hezbollah at all, even as it is now. So I expect that the Western interests have probably made preparations to trigger a civil war in Lebanon. I remember that during this, since the 7th October 2023, that we've seen reports that British Air Force has been flying many cargo flights into Lebanon. I didn't find proper explanations of what these flights were, who they were for, what they were carrying, and why. But for sure, they were not carrying supplies for Hezbollah. For sure, they were not carrying, vitamins and toys for children. I expect that they were bringing in weaponry for the opposition to Hezbollah, for Druze and Christian militias who might be armed and organized to take on Hezbollah. And then we have a risk of a civil war. Now, farther to the north, we have a reconstituted Syrian Arab army, which I have to say, I don't know how strong they are, what the troop levels are, how well armed they are, but they will be Hezbollah's ally. So who knows what will happen, and who knows what the role of Turkey will be in this whole mess. But I expect that, in the south you have Hezbollah, in the north you have Syrian Arab army, in the east you have Iranian militias and Iranian forces. I expect that it's going to be difficult. It's going to be bloody. We might have a real civil war happening there. But I think that ultimately it is inevitable that the forces allied with Iran will prevail. And let's not forget, Iran is not alone with this. Iran has two major allies, which is China and Russia. China has, in their Belt and Road Initiative and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, have designated Iran as the anchor of the new security architecture in that region. So I think that Iran will be helped. And on the other side, you have what? You have some militias, you have some terror groups, which are relatively small. We're talking this whole HTS thing, we're talking about tops 50,000, 30,000 troops with relatively light weaponry, incapable of governing any region in the Middle East. All they have on their side is violence and terrorism, and I think that only works for a time. I think it's coming to an end. I think these are the dying days of the Western Empire's hegemony in West Asia.
Alex, who's the British government right now? How do you see their role in? Because when you see Yemen and what's going on in the Middle East, they're bombing Yemen. They're doing everything together with the United States. In Ukraine, the same way, even more radical. Who are these people? What do they want?
For many years, it's been my contention that basically what we're dealing with is the undead British Empire. So I believe that the British Empire has simply, after World War One, when it's been in an advanced stage of disintegration, the vested interests behind the British Empire have decided to infiltrate and co-opt the United States, and then to use the American economic, military, and diplomatic power to continue to fight for the benefit of these vested interests. So they've turned from Britain as the imperial power to the United States as the imperial power. This is not even controversial. This is well understood in history. These roundtable groups and Royal Society for International Affairs, they've explicitly stated that they have to bring the United States on their side. They created these pilgrim clubs in the United States where they organized the most economically powerful elements of the American establishment, and they brought them into the Anglo-Saxon orbit, and their geopolitical strategy has been marked by this imperative of dominating the Eurasian landmass. And for the simple reason that this is where the majority of the global GDP is, the majority of the global population is, the majority of the world's energy resources and mineral wealth, and it's about the domination of the resources. And so it's a vast area, it's absolutely massive, and it's simply impossible to police it militarily. So you couldn't have enough troops and military bases to keep this all pacified and under your domination. So the only other way of controlling such a massive area is simply by following the recipe divide and rule. So they arranged over the 200 plus years of British Empire's domination in the region. They arranged this so that they can always, with relative ease, turn countries against countries, tribes against tribes, nations against nations. And so you've had 200 years of almost non-stop warfare. Whether it's between Ukraine and Russia today, whether it's between Israel and her neighbors, whether it's between India and Pakistan, India and China, Myanmar, Azerbaijan and Armenia, and so forth. This whole, they've created this arc of crises that they're constantly keeping these forever wars going, because that way they keep these nations weak. They keep them always in need of Western financial support and Western arms and military support. And so in this way they can condition this support by saying, okay, but we'll give you the protection, we'll give you the support, but you have to allow us to exploit your mineral resources, your energy resources, and so forth. It's not complicated. It's very clear, except that you can't work that out if you follow the mainstream media, because in the mainstream media they keep feeding us these stories for little children about freedom and democracy and human rights and women's rights and all this nonsense. But it's simply a continuation of the same policy that were established and perfected by the British Empire, only through the American force today. So when you ask me who are these people, ultimately this is the international banking cartel, headquartered in the city of London, with its most powerful satellite on Wall Street.
Alex, we know that the Russian government is talking about that they're going to sign this agreement between Iran and Russia on January 20th, hours before Donald Trump takes out office in Washington. These two countries are so interesting when you look at the United States' strategy in both of them. They have tried some sort of color revolution in Iran and in Russia. They have been dealing with terrorism, with ISIS, with these attacks, as we saw last year and the year before. Right now, they're getting together. It's not just about their economy is going to be more connected and their military going to be more connected. What do they want, in your opinion, by this agreement?
I think that the ultimate objective is to overturn this Anglo-Saxon strategy of forever wars, of holding dominance through this arc of crisis that always threatens to destabilize the region and plunge it into wars. And these nations always have to live with constant insecurity, always surrounded by these insurrectionist movements, by terrorist groups, by separatist movements, and so on. And I think that the alliance between Russia and Iran aims to overturn this and to ultimately get to a complete overhaul of the security architecture. So a complete pacification of the region, and a real one. And that means, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but when I say unfortunately, because it inevitably involves warfare, and it's probably going to be very, very difficult for the people living in the region. But it demands the elimination of all the terrorist groups, elimination of their financial and military support from the West, and it entails the elimination of Israel in its current format.
Right now in Ukraine, Joe Biden did everything and is doing everything to escalate the situation, to keep it going in Ukraine. And Keith Kellogg, with his proposal, it doesn't seem to work with Russians. They don't agree with what Keith Kellogg is going to offer them. Are we going to have Keith Kellogg being removed from the Trump administration, or Trump is capable of managing this situation and he's going to change the proposal? He's going to find some sort of solution for what's going on in Ukraine.
Well, Keith Kellogg is either going to go with the instructions he gets from Donald Trump's team, or he's going to be removed. One or the other. Obviously, what he's proposing today is a no-go. The Russians have absolutely no reason whatsoever to accept any of these proposals. But I suspect, again, that people around Trump are not that dumb. I find it hard to believe that they could be that dumb. I think they know what the score is. But again, we have that signaling thing where he cannot give away what his strategy might be, what he's willing to negotiate, because the new situation might very radically jeopardize the interests of the current ruling establishment in Washington and London. And so Kellogg is there pitching a proposal that might be acceptable to the current ruling establishment. And they can keep up the pretense that they will be pushing for this and that somehow they can twist the Russians' arm into accepting something like this. But I think this is fantasy. And I suspect that people around Trump understand that this is a fantasy. So they're going along with this until probably until the Donald Trump takes over in the White House. What they might end up negotiating afterwards could be very, very radically different. And I'll go out on a limb a little bit, speculating here, but I've noticed you can't quite pick it up from the media, but I've noticed a very radical change in the mood in Europe below the surface. Okay, so this is just an observation, but I think it is significant. On Christmas Eve, the Milan's Theater La Scala gave the performance of Tchaikovsky's ballet The Nutcracker. That may seem unexceptional. It's one of those things that goes with Christmas, right? It's a Christmas ballet. But the fact that it was a Russian composer is significant, because only a little bit more than 2 years ago, everybody was falling over themselves to cancel anything to do with anything with Russia. And we had cancellations of Tchaikovsky's performances. We had cancellations of courses of Russian literature around European universities and so forth. And now here, Christmas Eve 2024, we have the performance of Russian ballet in Milan. Not only that, they used Rudolf Nureyev's choreography, a Russian ballet dancer, and they invited a Russian conductor from the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg. And so it was a spectacularly beautiful production. They really tried very hard to make it very, very beautiful and attractive. And I thought there was something quite deliberate and purposeful in this. And I said to myself, wow, I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't the bank Intesa San Paolo who was sponsoring this. And then I dug a little bit online, and sure enough, I found that Bank Intesa San Paolo was, in fact, sponsoring this ballet performance. So we had Russian conductor, Russian performance, and Russian conductor leading the orchestra, partly all sponsored by an Italian bank, the largest bank in Italy. And this was also televised, so that people who couldn't go to La Scala in Milan could see the ballet on television. Now, I want to mention another two data points that are remotely related to this, and I'll get to why I think this is all very significant. So, a few years ago, during his first term, Donald Trump created the U.S. Space Force as the fourth arm of the American military, and that was very strange. It was a strange move, but I suspected that the ultimate objective of this was for Donald Trump and whoever is behind him to have a brand new hierarchy in the U.S. military that is perhaps more easily controlled by him and more loyal to him. So, okay, we don't know, but that's what happened. And then I think about a few months ago, maybe a year ago, Elon Musk's SpaceX obtained a major contract with the U.S. Space Forces. That's also interesting because Elon Musk is a major supporter of Donald Trump, and as we now know, most of his money comes from most of his business comes from the United States, from the Pentagon, from the U.S. military. And then I think only weeks or maybe days after that announcement was made, this same bank, which sponsored the performance of the Nutcracker in Milan a few days ago, made a major investment in Elon Musk's SpaceX. So what I gather from all this is that we're not just looking at Donald Trump and Elon Musk and John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. I think we're looking at a fracture in the Western ruling establishment, because let's remember, Banca Intesa San Paolo is a global systemically important bank. They're part of the whole network. But I think that, as usually happens when the empire starts to collapse, part of the ruling establishment recognizes that they're on the road to perdition, that if they continue on the same road, it's going to be a total destruction of everything, that is going to be a return to the Dark Ages. And they realize that the political, economic, and social currents in the world are changing. So they recognize that if you can't beat them, join them. And maybe there's a whole part of the ruling establishment now that is backing a complete turnaround in the way the Western powers are conducting their foreign policy. In one of the recent podcasts I did, somebody said, and I regret that I forget who said it, but I think that they captured it perfectly. Maybe it was Larry Johnson, that the United States has a choice now, either to be the hated global policeman or to become a polite guest at the banquet table with all the other nations and all the other powers. And I think that today there's a growing recognition that being a polite guest at the table with everybody else offers a much, much better future than the alternative, which is, the vestige of the ugly, dirty politics of the British Empire. And that some really powerful elements in the current ruling establishment are actually having a change of heart and a change of mind, and this is who is ultimately backing Donald Trump and his policies and his politics. So, going back to Kellogg, I think that he will have to do what he's told to do, that he will have to negotiate proposals that are going to be acceptable to the United States and acceptable to Russia. And we know that the Russians are not going to accept anything other than total capitulation of Ukraine. And I think that the Russians are increasingly having covert allies in the West as well, because people are growing tired of this permanent warfare and this dystopia that is encroaching from all sides. For anybody who's watched, I'm not a fan of ballet, but I ended up watching a good long chunk of that ballet because it was simply beautiful. It was simply really, really brilliantly done and produced and choreographed. And it made real significant contrast to, twerking and lewd spectacles like we had at the opening and closing ceremonies of the Paris Olympics and all of these things. And I think that beneath the surface, perhaps a majority of people, not only in Europe, but maybe in the United States as well, are ready for this change. They're tired. They're tired of permanent warfare, permanent polycrises. I think they want peace, they want cooperation, and that they want to be the polite guests at the global banquet table.
Alex, Emmanuel Macron was talking about the security of Europe. He said we cannot rely on other powers. He's talking about the United States. Do you think that this type of mindset is growing in Europe and European countries? And what do they want to do with that? Because at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of domestic policies in order to have a new structure of relationship between European countries and the United States, European countries and Russia, China, and Brics.
I think that mindset is very much entrenched in the ruling establishment in Europe. So, Emmanuel Macron might be a proponent of that mindset. Keir Starmer's government in London, the Greens in Germany, and so forth. But I think that the majority of the population no longer supports them, and we can see that. I'm in Croatia at the moment, and we had the presidential elections in the last Sunday before the New Year's, and the sitting president was confronted by the ruling party's candidate, and the ruling party, the one that's formed the government, the prime minister's party, very much wanted to eliminate the president, and they backed a candidate of their own, and they thought that the way to disqualify the current president is to demonize him and label him as a Vladimir Putin stooge, as a Russian player. And so they went with this. And so there was this heavy propaganda against the sitting president that he was a pro-Russian player, and a little bit in the same camp as Robert Fico in Slovakia and Viktor Orban in Hungary. And so they thought that would be the winning strategy. What happened instead is that in the first round of the elections, the sitting president scored an overwhelming victory. He got uh, almost 50% of the popular vote, and the ruling party's candidate got less than 20%. So that was a massive slap in the face. And at the same time, the population at large said, no, we don't care whether you call him a Russian stooge or a Putin puppet or whatever you want to call him. We are tired of this same policy, and we no longer want it. So it was the rejection of this same mindset that you cited, that you attributed to Emmanuel Macron, because this is what we have in many governments in the West today. But I think the mindset is dying, and I think that they realize that they are in great danger, that when Donald Trump comes to power, and we hope that all that goes smoothly, that they will lose the US support. Without the US support, Europe is nothing. Europe is too weak, and so that's why they are now frantically trying to create some kind of an alternative security arrangement where they would maybe set up in an EU force, but always with the mindset of being antagonistic towards Russia, and eventually going to war against Russia in the future. So we have hundreds of billions of dollars being poured into the quote unquote defense industries. We have more and more of these establishment politicians talking about conscription, about strengthening the military. The new presidency of the EU, the Polish, they put defense and security as their number one priority. Poland wants to be the biggest military in Europe. The NATO is building the largest military base in Romania, where the people equally said no to this mindset. I think it's only a matter of time when this mindset will be overturned altogether, because at this point you can only suppress the people by force and intimidation and censorship, and that only has a limited lifespan, because even in completely repressive regimes like we had in Romania under Ceausescu, the Soviet Union, East Germany, Albania, they all collapsed in the end. You can only sustain ruling by force over your population for so long. Ultimately, it has to collapse. And I think that Europe is on the way of those reforms and those changes. For the ruling establishment, the only hope of, let's say, gaining another lease of life is to escalate the war against Russia and to try to orchestrate this whole of society, whole of Europe confrontation between European powers and Russia, and then maybe if in that form they manage to prevail, then they could foresee another period like in the aftermath of World War II, when they retained power, they reformed the system a little bit, they wiped the slate clean, and they carry on for another 2, 3, 4 decades until the next big war. But I think that this is dying. I think that people are more awake than they have ever been, and they're clearly demanding radical changes. I think that ultimately they will have those radical changes.
Alex, we had, considering Brics, we had new, and on January 1st, we had 9 countries being the new partners of Brics. And when you look at the list, you see Indonesia, Malaysia, which are 2 important and powerful countries. You see Cuba and Bolivia, which I'm so happy to see them in the list.
Yes.
You don't see Turkey being part of this list. Where is it going? to happen to BRICS and the way that they're trying to grow in 2025? Do you see that this move on their part would help these countries, and how is that going to happen in your
I think that the BRICS are a gathering tsunami. You know, uh, many countries, most countries in the world, I think, want to become members of BRICS. I think that it's a better system. It's a better arrangement for the global South, which has been plundered and exploited by Western powers for 2 centuries. BRICS is a reaction to the colonialist system that the West has imposed on the rest of the world for not just 2 centuries, longer, 5 centuries. And as a result, we still have most of the nations of the global South that are poor, that are underdeveloped, in spite of their vast natural wealth and young populations. They should all be doing well. I lived in Venezuela, and Venezuela is one of the richest nations in the world, with very large oil reserves. They should be a wealthy country, but when I lived there, 80% of the Venezuelan population lived under the poverty line of the World Bank. And the fact that we have now a socialist regime in Venezuela under Maduro, and his predecessor was Hugo Chavez, right? That was a reaction to these, you know, decades and centuries of exploitation. And now, and in the past, there was no alternative. There was for a time this non-aligned movement, but non-aligned movement was mostly a political movement. It didn't have robust economic foundations to uh, as a real alternative to the Western economic system of trade and finance. Uh, the BRICS are now deliberately creating an alternative system of finance, of trade, of payments, and I think that this is going to be irresistibly attractive to many nations. Uh, and once they have sufficient security guarantees, that they won't be attacked by the Western powers, that there won't be regime change, color revolutions, uh, terror groups, separatist movements, and all this, then I think it's going to be almost a no-brainer, because in marketing this BRICS arrangement to let's say the African nations over the last year or two, China and Russia have been explicit that if you join us and you default on your financial obligations to Western financial institutions, we will not penalize you for that. And if you decide to nationalize your industries and your resources, we won't penalize you for that either. And so, with adequate security guarantees, many of these nations who are spending most of their government budgets on servicing debts to, the IMF, World Bank, and private banking institutions in the West, will be able to simply say, you know what, no mas, we no longer recognize these debts to you, we'll no longer be servicing to you, and then they will be able to breathe with full lungs and join the multipolar integrations and trade with the rest of the world unencumbered and without these very, very predatory relationship with the Western institutions. So I think that this, in fullness of time, this new model will prevail. But at this time, we have the Western Empire, the Anglo-American Empire, which is in its dying agony, and it's extremely dangerous. And we see that everywhere around the world, they are backing these terrorist groups and separatist movements, and they're trying regime changes everywhere, and they are still powerful in that sense. They are still good at doing this, as we've seen. In the last year, they regime changed Bangladesh, they regime changed Syria, and so they still have the capacity of causing a lot of pain. And so the nations have to be very cautious in dealing with the West and their proxies. But the West is growing weaker, and the West is losing. They can still destroy things, but they cannot build them back. They cannot create a new world arrangement as they were able to in the aftermath of World War II. That is gone. I think they no longer have that capacity, and they no longer have the reputation to be able to lead, because in the aftermath of World War II, the rest of the world looked up to the Western powers for leadership, and Western powers provided that leadership. Today, this is no longer the case. Today, the nations are looking for leadership to Russia and to China, and so this changes everything. And I think it's only a matter of time before the Western Empire withers and dies, and the United States probably rejoins the rest of the world as the polite guest at the banquet.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Always a pleasure, Nima, and until the next time.
Yeah. See you next.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.